It was a warm morning in Delhi when the large hall began to fill with quiet footsteps and hushed conversations. People from all over the world were arriving for a special event. It was a tech summit, but not just any summit. It was something different this time. Leaders from India, business icons from Silicon Valley, and young students were all sitting together under one roof. Among the audience, cameras were everywhere. Some people held their phones high, waiting to capture a moment they could share with the world. Others sat silently, holding their breath. The energy in the room was high, yet calm, like a storm waiting to begin. On stage sat Narendra Modi, India's Prime Minister. Beside him, dressed in a plain black suit with a quiet smile, was Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google, a man who came from a modest family in Chennai and rose to become one of the most respected tech leaders in the world. As the event began, speakers took turns. They talked about artificial intelligence, India's future, and global responsibility. The room remained respectful. Each word spoken carried weight. Everything seemed in perfect balance. But suddenly something changed. A man, dressed in formal clothes, stood up from the audience. His tone was sharp, his voice loud. He did not ask a question. Instead, he raised his voice and said something that made the entire room fall silent. He said, "Mr. Modi, you talk about India's progress. But what progress are you speaking of? We still have poor people on the streets. We still have children without food. How can you sit here with pride?" His words were not just disrespectful. They were cold. They were spoken not as a question, but as an insult. Some audience members gasped. Others looked down. The man's face was filled with anger, but there was no humility in it. It was not the pain of a citizen. It was the arrogance of someone who wanted attention. Modi remained still. He did not move. He looked at the man, then gently shifted his eyes down. It was the kind of silence that felt louder than any word. But it was Sundar Pichai who the cameras turned to next. He did not react. He didn't defend. He didn't speak. He simply turned his eyes toward the man, calm and steady, and held that gaze for a few seconds. The man looked back, but something changed. It was as if he had expected anger, or maybe he had hoped for a fight, but all he saw was quiet strength. No judgment, just a firm, still look from a man who had once walked barefoot to school and now led one of the world's biggest companies. The moment passed, but it stayed in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. The moderator quickly tried to move on. He thanked the audience and reminded them of the summit's theme, building bridges through respect. But the tension in the room was real. No one smiled, no one clapped, and Sundar still had not spoken a single word. Hours later, social media was flooded with clips. Most people shared that one short video, Sundar Pichai's face, his silence, and the man who slowly sat down, visibly shaken, as if he realized something in that very moment. People wrote, "His silence spoke, louder than any speech." And you don't need to raise your voice when you have truth on your side. But back inside the green room, away from cameras and applause, Sundar sat with his phone off. He was quiet. He didn't want to be part of the trend. For him, it was not about being seen as a hero. Modi walked in. The two men sat together in silence for a moment. Then Modi said, in a soft voice, "What you did today, ... It reminded me of something my mother used to say." Sundar looked at him and waited. Modi continued, "She would say, when the wind screams, the mountain stands still. You were that mountain." Sundar smiled, but said nothing. Modi nodded. "Thank you. But this was just the beginning." That moment on stage had opened a door that no one expected. Because the man who shouted, whose face had gone viral, was not done yet. He was about to do something that would test not just Sundar's patience, but his values. The next day, that same man appeared on a news channel. His name was Vinay Raj. He spoke with energy. He said he had every right to speak the way he did. He said India needed to hear hard truths. He blamed Sundar for not replying. He called it arrogance in silence. Those words stung many people, but Sundar, he said nothing again. The media pushed for a reply. They asked, "Will you respond?" Reporters followed Sundar to his hotel. They asked him in the elevator, in the lobby, during breakfast. But he only smiled and said, "I prefer not to speak when I am not adding value." Still, the pressure grew. Some people praised him, others mocked him. Then something unexpected happened. A school principal from a small village in Uttar Pradesh wrote a letter. She had watched the video of Sundar's silent response with her students. She wrote to Sundar and said, "We are teaching our children that silence is not weakness. Thank you for showing them." Sundar was touched. He decided to visit the school. Quietly, without media. He met the children. He sat with them, answered their questions, and listened to their stories. One little girl asked, "Sir, why didn't you fight back?" Sundar bent down to her level and said, "Because when your roots are deep, storms can't shake you. And sometimes, when someone shouts, they are only hurting inside. You don't fight pain with noise. You heal it with peace." The children clapped, but not everyone agreed. A few days later, Vinny Raj posted another video. He claimed that Sundar's visit to the school was a cover-up. He said it was a media trick. But there were no cameras at the school. Only smiles. Still, Vinay's words reached people. The story became bigger. Some people began taking sides. But in the middle of this noise, a new detail surfaced. Someone from Vinay's past came forward. A woman named Sneha, who once worked with Vinay, shared an old story. She said that years ago, when Vinay was going through a personal tragedy, it was a donation from an anonymous person that helped save his father's life. The amount was large, but the donor's name was never revealed until now, because Sneha showed an old email. The donation was made by Sundar Pichai. The internet froze. The same man who had just been insulted publicly had quietly saved the life of the one who insulted him. No announcement, no interviews, just silent help. And suddenly, everything changed. People began to see Sundar in a new light. But Sundar himself still said nothing. He simply sent one message to Sneha, asking her not to speak further. But the truth was already out. Vinay was invited again to speak, this time on a live TV debate. The host asked him directly, "Do you know who helped your family?" Vinay looked confused, then quiet. The host said, "It was Sundar Pichai years ago," without a word, without asking anything back. The studio went silent. Vinay's eyes filled with tears. He looked down and whispered, "I didn't know, ... That night, Sundar finally broke his silence. He posted one simple message on his social platform. It said, "We don't lose anything by being kind. We lose ourselves when we forget how." And that line traveled across the world, from classrooms in India to offices in New York, from homes in villages to halls of power. Sundar's quiet words made noise, but the story was not over, because Vinay, now shaken and full of regret, asked to meet Sundar. The meeting was arranged. But what happened inside that room became something no one expected. What was said between two men, one who gave insult and one who gave silence, would teach the world something unforgettable, and in part 2, that moment will unfold. The meeting was arranged in a quiet room inside the conference center. No cameras. No magia. Just 2 chairs, 1 table, and a window with soft light falling in. Sundar arrived first. He walked in wearing a simple gray shirt and dark pants. He carried no phone, no notebook, no assistant. He just sat down and looked out the window for a while, watching the leaves moving in the wind. Then, the door opened. Vinay Raj stepped in. His face looked tired, not because of lack of sleep, but because of the weight in his heart. He paused for a moment before sitting down. They both sat silently. Seconds passed, like minutes. Then Vinay finally broke the silence. He said, "I didn't know it was you." His voice trembled. Sundar looked at him, calm and kind, and replied, "You were not supposed to know." Vinay's eyes lowered. He took a breath, then said, "I spoke badly. I said things that were hurtful. I thought I was standing for truth. But maybe I was standing for my own anger." Sundar leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "Truth doesn't shout, Vinay. It whispers, and those who truly listen hear it without noise." Vinay's hands shook slightly. He said, "Why did you help my father?" Sundar gave a small smile. "Because someone once helped mine." Vinay's lips parted, but no words came. Sundar continued, "Years ago, my father fell ill. We didn't have enough. A stranger stepped in. I never met him, never knew his name. But his kindness became a light in my darkest moment. Since then, I made a promise to myself. If I could ever help someone, I would, without expecting anything." Vinay was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I was wrong, and I don't know how to fix it." Sundar looked directly into his eyes and said, "You fix it by not letting your pain become someone else's." Tears rolled down Vinay's cheeks. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something. I was going to post it online, but I wanted to give it to you first." Sundar took the note and read it quietly. It said, "I insulted a man who helped me silently. I disrespected a leader in front of the world. I let my anger speak louder than my heart. But today, I learned something. Dignity is not in how loud you speak, but in how gently you listen. I'm sorry, Dotson." Folded the note, put it in his pocket, and said, "The fact that you wrote this means you've already begun fixing it." Vinay asked, "What should I do now?" Sundar paused, then answered, "Use your voice, not to shout, but to build. Tell your story, not to shame yourself, but to guide others." Vinay nodded slowly. They both stood up. As Vinay turned to leave, Sundar said, "And if you ever need help again, just ask. No shame in asking, only strength." Vinay left the room with a lighter step. But outside that room, the world had already begun to change. The story of Sundar helping Vinay had spread like fire across social media, news outlets, and even classroom discussions. In a school in Pune, a teacher asked her students, "What do you learn from Sundar's silence?" A young boy stood up and said, "Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer to noise." Meanwhile, at Sundar's office in California, his team watched in amazement as millions of people wrote messages online, not just about the event, but about how it changed their view of leadership. A mother in Kerala posted, "My son used to think strength was shouting. Now he says it's staying calm when others shout." A retired soldier from Punjab wrote, "This is the India I fought for. One that speaks with kindness, not hatred." Even world leaders reacted. The European minister tweeted, "Grace under fire." Sundar Pichai shows us the power of silent dignity. But while the world reacted, Sundar remained quiet. He didn't join the debate. He didn't celebrate the attention. He focused instead on his next task. He called his team and said, "Let's begin the India Uplift program. No noise, just action." It was something he had planned for years, a digital education platform for rural schools. But now, after what happened, he decided to move faster. "Start with the school that sent me the letter," he said. "Then reach every child we can." His team worked day and night, and within weeks, the platform went live. Simple devices were sent to schools across remote areas. Teachers were trained online. Sundar personally joined a few of the first calls. One day, while talking to a group of students from Bihar, a girl asked, "Sir, why do you care so much about us?" Sundar smiled and replied, "Because when I was young, someone believed in me. Now, it's my turn to believe in you." The children clapped with joy, but at the same time, another storm was rising. A few political voices began questioning Sundar's intentions. They said, "Is he trying to enter politics? Is he trying to become a hero?" The headlines were loud again. They said, "From tech leader to silent leader, is Sundar Pichai planning something bigger?" But Sundar's reply was simple. In a short video, he said, "I have no political dreams. I only have human dreams. Dreams where children learn, where respect wins, where silence is not seen as weakness." And that message became a movement. Thousands of people started using the hashtag Silent Strength. Artists painted murals of Sundar's quiet expression. Schools held competitions to write essays on the power of silence. One poem went viral. "You shouted with fire. He stood with grace. You tried to shame. He lifted your face. You spoke to hurt. He chose not to speak. You showed the world. His silence is not weak." But something else happened that no one expected. Veena Raj, now full of humility, requested a chance to speak at the same tech summit next year. Organizers were unsure. Many felt it was too soon. But Sundar said, "Give him a voice. Let him show the world that change is possible." And so, Veena was allowed the next year. The hall filled once more. Narendra Modi sat in the same place, Sundar Pichai again beside him. But this time, the spotlight was also on Vinay. He stepped onto the stage, holding a single sheet of paper. He said, "Last year, I stood in this room full of anger. Today, I stand full of gratitude. I insulted, and I was forgiven. I shouted, and I was heard through silence. And now, I will use my voice to teach others what that moment taught me." He paused. Leadership is not in how strong you speak. It's in how calmly you listen. Dignity is not taken. It is earned and returned with kindness. The crowd gave a standing ovation. Narendra Modi stood up and clapped. Sundar Pichai smiled, not for attention, but because he saw something beautiful. Man had changed. Not through debate, not through punishment, but through silent compassion. And as Vinay stepped down, he walked to Sundar and bowed his head. Sundar stood up and hugged him. No words were spoken, but that image, two men standing in peace, went around the world again. In homes, in schools, in offices, people watched and felt something deeper than pride. They felt hope, but still, something unexpected was coming, because soon, Sundar's past would return in a way that would shake even his strong heart. And in part 3, a secret from Sundar's early days in Chennai will surface, one that was never meant to be told, and one that will test everything he stands for. It had been a month since the second tech summit ended. Sundar Pichai had returned to his usual work. He continued to visit schools, silently, answer questions from young minds, and expand the India Uplift program across more rural regions. The world still remembered the moment between Vinay Raj and Sundar. It had become a symbol of healing. People had started using Sundar's words in leadership workshops, school lessons, and even conflict resolution programs. But while the world celebrated the present, something from the past was quietly making its way to the surface. In a small corner of Chennai, an old woman named Shantha sat outside her tea stall, flipping through an old album of photos. She was 81 years old, with silver hair, gentle eyes, and a memory sharp enough to remember the name of every child who ever came to her tea stall after school. One of those children was Sundar. She had not seen him for many years, but one day, while scrolling through the television in her neighbor's house, she saw his face, and tears filled her eyes. She told her neighbor, "I knew he would become someone great. Not because he was smart, but because he was kind." The neighbor smiled and said, "You should tell people that." But Shantha had kept a secret she never told Sundar. A secret that would now reach him with the help of a local journalist named Arjun. She wrote a letter. She asked him to send it to Sundar. The letter said, "Dear Sundar, You may not remember me. I ran the tea stall outside your school. You used to help me carry water when my legs were weak. You never asked for money. You always smiled and left. But there is something you don't know. One evening, when you were just 16, I saw you give your school tiffin to a beggar who had no food. Later that night, that beggar told me, a boy with a school bag fed me today and gave me hope. He said he wanted to change his life because of that kindness. That man later got a small job and returned to thank me, but I never told him it was you. Now that I see what you have become, I thought you should know. Your kindness saves someone without you knowing. With blessings, Shantarjun, the journalist, sent the letter directly to Sundar's team, and when Sundar read it, he sat in silence for almost an hour. He remembered that day. He remembered the man, but he never knew what happened after. He had simply given food and walked away. Now, years later, that one small act had become a seed that grew into someone else's life. Sundar was deeply moved. He called his assistant and said, I want to go to Chennai quietly. No media. And so, on a calm Sunday morning, Sundar walked down the narrow street near his old school, dressed simply, with no security. He reached the tea stall. Shantha was sitting on her wooden stool, boiling tea in an old steel pot. She looked up, her eyes widened. She stood slowly, her hands trembling. Sundar walked closer and folded his hands with respect. She began to cry. They sat together for hours, sipping tea, talking about the past, and laughing like old friends. At one point, Sundar asked her, Do you know what happened to that man? Shantha nodded. He works in a library now, wants to help poor children read. Sundar closed his eyes for a moment and whispered, All from one lunchbox. Shantha smiled and said, Never doubt the power of small kindness. But even as this heartwarming story unfolded in private, something else was happening far away in another part of the country. A powerful businessman named Yusuf Sheikh was watching Sundar closely. Yusuf was known for running a chain of private tech schools, but he had a dark side. Many of his centers charged high fees and gave little value. He feared that Sundar's free digital platform would destroy his business model. His team showed him data. Sir, they said, if this continues, most rural schools will stop needing private tech support. Sundar's program is expanding too fast. Yusuf frowned. We need to stop him, or discredit him. So he hired a group of social media influencers to begin a campaign. They started posting messages like, Why is Sundar doing all this now? Is he trying to become India's next leader? Why no support to urban schools? Is this just a popularity trick? Slowly, doubt began to spread among a small section of people. One video even said, The man who stayed silent when someone insulted Modi, is he too weak to speak up for himself? It gained views. It spread. And soon, the headlines began to change. Tech savior or silent player is Sundar Pichai, using silence as a mask. Sundar's team advised him to respond. His public relations head said, Sir, we must clear your name, make a statement. But Sundar said calmly, Truth defends itself. I will not shout back. He remained focused. But that night, he received a call that shook him. The caller was none other than Vinay Raj. Sundar, he said, I know what this feels like. They are trying to twist your silence into weakness, like I once did. Please, let me help you now. Sundar paused, then said, No. If you fight back, you'll become their mirror. We must stay different. Vinay replied, But at least let me speak the truth. Sundar smiled gently. Then do it. But speak from your heart. Not against them, but for those who still believe. The next morning, Vinay posted a heartfelt video. He said, I once called Sundar Pichai arrogant for being silent. But that silence changed me. Now, others are doing the same to him. I've seen his heart. I've seen his work. And I know his silence is not weakness. It is strength. If you want proof, go to the schools he's helping. See the children learning. See the teachers growing. Silence is not always empty. Sometimes, it is full of meaning. The video went viral, and slowly, public trust began to rise again. People began posting pictures of Sundar's digital learning tablets arriving in remote villages. Children holding them, smiling. Teachers thanking him without ever meeting him. And just when it seemed peace had returned, another twist came. A leaked document appeared online. It showed that Sundar's team was planning to expand the program in 2 countries outside India too, places in Africa, Southeast Asia, and parts of South America. The headline read, "Is Sundar building a global movement?" The reactions were mixed. Some said, "This is inspiring." Others said, "This is dangerous. One man can't be allowed to influence so many minds." Governments began to question the scale of Sundar's reach. Official letters arrived at his office, asking for details. A journalist asked, "Are you trying to replace governments with your technology?" Sundar simply answered, "No. I'm just trying to make sure a child with dreams doesn't lose them because of where they were born." But the pressure was real now. Meetings were called. Agencies began investigating. Some powerful people wanted Sundar to slow down. Others wanted him to stop. And in the middle of all this, Sundar received a message that would test him more than anything else had so far. It was from a young boy in Somalia. The message said, "Dear Sir, my name is Abdi. I live in a small village. I watched your video on my teacher's old phone. We don't have books here, but I want to learn. I want to become a doctor. Can your team help me? Even just 1 tablet." Sundar stared at the message for a long time. He thought about the boy, about the tea stall, about the lunchbox he once gave, and about the weight of silence. He whispered to himself, "What do I do when the world tells me to stop? But the children keep asking me to go on." And in part 4, Sundar will have to make a choice to bow to pressure or to stand firm in silence, even when it means risking everything. Sundar was preparing for his next visit to a school in Madhya Pradesh when his phone rang. It was an international number from London. He almost ignored it, but something told him to pick up. On the other end was a quiet voice. It was a woman named Leela, an old family friend. She spoke slowly. "Sundar, I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I need to tell you something. Something about your brother." Sundar froze. His brother Rajiv was someone he rarely spoke about in public. They had grown up together in Chennai, shared meals, and walked the same dusty roads to school. But after Rajiv moved abroad, they had drifted apart, not because of anger, but because of silence. Leela continued, "He's been in the hospital for weeks. He didn't want you to know. He said he didn't want to disturb your work." Sundar sat down slowly. His heart tightened. "What happened?" he asked softly. "Kidney failure," Leela replied. "He kept it hidden. He's been using borrowed money, staying quiet, too proud to ask for help." Sundar was silent for a long time. Then he whispered, "I'll be there in the morning." He canceled all his meetings. No press, no official note, just a flight to London and a heart filled with worry. When Sundar entered the small hospital room, he found Rajiv lying on the bed, pale but awake. His eyes widened with surprise. "You came," Rajiv said, his voice weak. "You didn't tell me," Sundar replied. "You were busy saving the world," Rajiv said with a half smile. "I didn't want to be a distraction." Sundar sat beside him, holding his hand. "You were never a distraction. You were my first teacher. You taught me how to fix radios, how to build my first circuit. How could you think I wouldn't care?" Rajiv turned his face away. "Because I failed, Sundar. I didn't become you. I didn't achieve anything. I didn't want to appear weak." Sundar looked at his brother with gentle eyes. "You think success is loud? No. Success is in quiet sacrifice. You helped me when we were poor. You gave me your shoes. You skipped meals so I could eat. I remember everything." A tear rolled down Rajiv's cheek. For the next hour, the two brothers spoke like they hadn't in years. The hospital room was filled with old memories, soft laughter, and healing silence. But then, Rajiv reached into his drawer and pulled out a folded paper. "There's something else," he said. "Something I should have told you long ago." Sundar took the paper and slowly opened it. It was an old letter, dated over 20 years ago, addressed to Sundar, but it had never reached him. Rajeev explained, "You remember when you got the scholarship to study in the US? The day before you left, a professor from the institute mailed this letter. It came to our house, but I never gave it to you." Sundar's eyes narrowed. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Because it said you weren't the top choice. They had doubts. They almost rejected your application. But I didn't want to break your spirit, so I hid the letter. I believed in you more than they did." Sundar held the letter tightly. The words on the page read, "We regret to inform you that based on your final interview, the panel has reservations. However, due to limited options, your name is still being considered. It was not a rejection, but it was not a clear acceptance either." Sundar looked up. "You thought I couldn't handle this?" "No," Rajiv said. "I thought you would stop believing in yourself, and I knew, deep inside, you were meant for something greater." Sundar leaned back, his mind racing. All these years, he had believed he was chosen because of merit. Now, he knew it was close. A matter of chance. Or maybe, of faith. A deep silence filled the room. But then, Sundar folded the letter gently and said, "Thank you." Rajiv was surprised. "You're not angry?" Sundar shook his head. "You did it out of love. And maybe that doubt pushed me harder. Maybe it made me better." The next day, Sundar held a press conference. But instead of speaking about education or technology, he shared a personal story. He told the world, "I used to think success came from confidence. Now I know. It also comes from people who believe in you, even when you don't see your own light." He then held up the letter his brother gave him. "This letter reminded me that doubt is not the enemy of success. Sometimes, it's the fuel." People around the world were touched. Millions shared the story. Sundar's brother, still recovering, received thousands of messages of love and respect. One young man tweeted, "I failed last year. Today, I will try again. Thank you, Sundar." But not everyone was happy. "Why us, Sheikh?" The businessman who had once tried to stop Sundar's education program now saw a new opportunity. He said in an interview, "Even Sundar admits he was a second choice. How can we let someone like that lead the future of global education?" His words were bitter. The media asked Sundar if he wanted to respond. Sundar smiled and said, "Let people speak. My work will speak louder." A few days later, Sundar received another message. This time, from the child in Peru who had once thanked him. The girl wrote, "My teacher showed me your story. Now I know that even great people face rejection. I failed my math test, but I will try again." Sundar sat quietly. He whispered to himself, "Maybe sharing our weakness is the strongest thing we can do." Meanwhile, Vinay Raj was busy expanding, his foundation voice within. He held events in small towns, teaching young people how to express themselves with kindness. In one session, a boy asked, "Sir, do we always have to stay silent like Sundar?" Vinay smiled. "No. Silence is a tool, not a rule. Speak when needed. Stay calm when others try to pull you down. But always speak with respect." Sundar was proud of Vinay, but he also knew that another moment of truth was coming. The Global Education Board had finished their review. The final decision was expected in a week. If approved, Sundar's platform would be allowed to operate freely across the world. If rejected, it could be banned in over 20 countries. His team was nervous, but Sundar remained calm. He said, We've done our part. Let truth finish the story. And in the final days before the decision, Sundar traveled to a remote village in Ladakh. A school there had just received its first delivery of learning kits. As he entered the classroom, a boy stood up and said, "Sir, we thought no one knew we existed." Sundar knelt beside him and replied, "Even the quietest child matters." They lit a small lamp together, symbolizing light through learning. But just as Sundar prepared to leave, he received a call. The decision had been made. His global education project was either about to rise or fall, and in part 6, the world will hear the final verdict and witness how one man's silence turned into a voice that echoed across generations. It was a cold morning in California. Sundar stood by the window of his office, holding a warm cup of chai. His eyes were fixed on the hills in the distance, but his mind was elsewhere. In just a few hours, the Global Education Board would announce their decision. His team had done everything right. His mission had reached villages, cities, and forgotten corners of the world. Yet the future of his program now rested in the hands of people who had never seen those classrooms, never met those children, and never felt what he had felt. The quiet desperation in the eyes of a child with no book. His phone buzzed. A message flashed on the screen. "Press conference begins in 1 hour." Sundar nodded. He closed his eyes and whispered a silent prayer, not for victory, but for peace. Meanwhile, across the world, millions of people were watching and waiting. Teachers, students, volunteers, and parents gathered in homes, community centers, and schools. Children in Peru, India, Ghana, Nepal, and Syria held handmade signs that read, "Education is hope." We stand with Sundar. Silent strength. Global change. At exactly 9 a.m., the board chairwoman stepped onto the stage in Geneva. Cameras clicked. Microphones turned on. She looked serious, then she began to speak. After months of review, public feedback, and legal consultation, we have made our decision. Sundar's team gathered behind him in the office, tense and hopeful. We have voted unanimously. Everyone held their breath to support and approve Sundar Pichai's global education initiative. The room erupted. Cheers, claps, and tears filled Sundar's office. But Sundar, he simply smiled. He walked to a quiet corner, picked up his notebook, and wrote a single line. The world heard us, without us shouting. News channels across the globe lit up with the headline, "Sundar Pichai's education mission approved worldwide." A new chapter begins in a small village in Somalia. Abdi ran out of his hut and shouted, "We did it." In Peru, the girl who once wrote Sundar a letter hugged her teacher. In Ladakh, the school bell rang longer that day. And in Chennai, outside a little tea stall, Shantha wept with joy. "My boy did it," she whispered. But Sundar's journey didn't stop there. He called a press conference not to celebrate himself, but to launch something new. He stood in front of the cameras and said, "This is not about me. This is about the children who stayed silent because no one listened, the teachers who never had tools, the villages that were forgotten. Today, we begin a new phase. Project Open Book," he continued. "We will train local mentors in every region. We will create stories in every language, and we will teach children not just math and science, but also kindness, respect, and hope." Reporters asked, "How does it feel to finally win?" Sundar replied, "This isn't a win. This is a beginning." One journalist asked, "What message do you have for those who tried to stop you?" Sundar paused, smiled, and said, "Thank you. Your doubt helped me stay focused. Your noise reminded me why silence matters." The video went viral, but something else happened. Yusuf Sheikh, the man who once tried to discredit Sundar, released a video of his own. In it, he said, "I was wrong. I fought him because I was afraid. But today, I see that his silence was not pride, it was purpose. I will shut down my chain of overpriced tech schools, and I will donate half my wealth to project open book. The world was stunned. Even Sundar was surprised. He sent Yusuf a short message. It said, "Thank you for joining the quiet revolution." In Delhi, Narendra Modi invited Sundar to a private meeting. The two sat in silence for a while. Then Modi said, "The boy from Chennai who once stayed quiet when insulted. Today, the world repeats his silence with respect." Sundar nodded. "Sir, I never wanted power, just impact." Modi replied, "And that is why you now hold more power than most, because you never asked for it." A few days later, Sundar returned to London to visit his brother, Rajiv, who was now recovering. Well, they sat in the hospital garden, sipping tea. Rajiv said, "You did it." Sundar smiled. "No, we did it." Rajiv looked into the distance. "Remember when we were boys? You used to dream big. I used to dream quietly. Now, you're turning those dreams into reality." Sundar placed his hand on Rajiv's shoulder. "You were the first to believe in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." They sat in silence, the kind only brothers understand, and as the sun began to set, Sundar stood up and said, "Let's go home." But home, for Sundar, was no longer just a place. It was a feeling. A classroom with dirt floors, a smile from a child who just learned to read. A letter from a stranger he once helped. A loud room that chose to listen when he remained silent. Months later, Project Open Book reached over 25 countries. Children from different faiths, languages, and lands read the same stories. Stories of kindness, stories of humility, stories of people like Sundar, who taught the world that you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to speak with truth. One school in Kenya built a mural of Sundar's face beside the words, "He spoke less, and the world listened more." In a global summit held a year later, Sundar was asked to give the closing speech. He walked to the podium. The audience waited, but Sundar stood silently for 10 seconds. Then he said, "Those 10 seconds of silence just reminded you how powerful quiet can be. It made you feel something. It made you listen. That's what the world needs more of, not just voices, but spaces between them." He ended with a line that became his legacy. Change doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just walks in quietly and stays. The audience stood and clapped for several minutes, not for the fame, not for the money, but for the message. And as Sundar stepped off the stage, a young girl ran up to him with a notebook in hand. "Sir, can I ask you something?" she said. Sundar knelt down. "Of course. What do you want to be remembered for?" He paused, then said, "For being someone who made silence feel safe again." And that answer traveled across generations. Years later, children would read his story in books, not as a fairy tale, not as a myth, but as a reminder that one man, with no anger, no pride, and no loud words, still changed the world. 2 years had passed since Sundar Pichai launched Project Open Book. The world had changed in quiet but powerful ways. Villages that once had no electricity now had children reading under solar lamps. Students from war-torn regions were writing letters to classmates across oceans. Teachers were no longer alone. They had a global network of support, thanks to Sundar's silent revolution. But Sundar had stepped back from the spotlight. He had done his part. He had shown the world what silence could build. Now he wanted to listen again. He moved back to India quietly, choosing to live in a simple home near the outskirts of Chennai. His days were peaceful. He walked barefoot in the mornings, visited small schools, unannounced, and sometimes helped old shopkeepers repair their broken radios, just like he used to as a boy. But something strange began happening. Young leaders from across the world began writing to him. They asked him to guide them, not as a boss, but as a mentor. A boy from Nigeria wrote, "Sir, how do I lead without shouting?" A girl from Brazil asked, "How do I stay strong when others laugh at my calm voice?" And from a refugee camp in Syria, a teenage teacher sent a note, "We're teaching children how to read. Your books are all we have. What would you like us to tell them about who you are?" Sundar smiled at that last one. He picked up a pen and wrote back, "Tell them I'm someone who believes they are stronger than they think, and that every soft voice holds a storm of light inside." These letters gave birth to a new idea. Sundar gathered a small team of young volunteers, writers, teachers, artists, and quiet thinkers from every continent. He called it the Light Circle. No office, no hierarchy, no rules, just people who believed in healing the world with compassion and wisdom together. They created a free online library with thousands of stories in over 60 languages, real stories of real people who changed lives through quiet courage. They launched a digital campaign called Kindness is Strength, and then something unexpected happened. A major political leader from Europe invited Sundar to speak at a peace summit where presidents and prime ministers from around the world would be present. Sundar declined. Instead, he sent a handwritten letter. In it, he wrote, "You don't need another voice on stage. You need to create space for voices off stage. Invite teachers, farmers, nurses, janitors. Let them tell you what peace really means." The summit took his advice, and for the first time in history, it was not the world leaders who opened the ceremony. It was a young teacher from Colombia and a refugee mother from Sudan. Both told their stories of survival and hope. The world listened in silence, and the silence changed them. Back in India, Sundar received an invitation he could not ignore. Narendra Modi, now nearing the end of his term, had asked him to attend a farewell ceremony honoring those who made a lasting impact on India. Sundar agreed, not for recognition, but because he believed in completing circles. The event was held in Delhi, in the same hall where years ago a man had insulted Modi, and Sundar had chosen to remain silent. Now, the room looked different, older, wiser. The crowd stood as Modi walked onto the stage. He greeted everyone and said, "Today, I want to thank a man who stood with me in silence when many would have shouted. He showed the world that dignity doesn't wear armor, it wears patience." He turned to Sundar, seated in the front row. "Please stand," Modi said. The crowd clapped gently as Sundar rose. Modi continued, "You taught us that words are not the only way to lead. Sometimes, it is in the quiet actions, in the unheard help, in the unnoticed kindness, that the deepest change begins." Modi then did something no one expected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple brass pen. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "She used it to sign letters for people who needed help. I now pass it to you, not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder. Write the future silently, but boldly." Sundar took the pen with both hands. He said nothing. He simply bowed, and in that moment, everyone understood. Nothing more needed to be said. Later that evening, as Sundar walked through the garden behind the hall, he saw a young journalist waiting. Nervously, "Sir, may I ask one last question?" the reporter said. Sundar nodded. "What is the one thing the world forgets the most?" Sundar thought for a while, then said, "That silence is not the opposite of action. Sometimes, it is the beginning of it." The next morning, headlines read, "A journey that began with an insult ends in inspiration." Sundar Pichai, the man who spoke loudest without raising his voice across India. People spoke about how his life had changed hearts, minds, and systems, not with force, but with grace. Abdi, now a teenager in Somalia, was teaching other boys to read. Meera, from India, had become a medical student and often spoke to rural girls about dreams. Vinay Raj's voice within had expanded to over 300 centers. Yusuf Sheikh had rebuilt his tech centers as free innovation hubs. And in a corner of Chennai, the tea stall run by Shanta had a new signboard above it. It read, "Welcome to the stall where silence once had chai and changed the world." And Sundar, he returned to the same place every month. He sat on the bench outside. No security, No cameras, just quiet. A few children would gather around him and ask questions. "Sir, how did you do it?" Sundar would smile and reply, "I just didn't speak when others expected me to. And I spoke only when someone needed me to." Then one day, a little girl ran up to him, handed him a piece of paper, and said, "I wrote this in school." He opened it. It was a short poem. They shouted at Modi, but Sundar stood still, not with words, but with heart and will. The world threw noise. He gave a hand, and slowly, quietly, he helped us all stand. He looked at the girl, smiled, and whispered, "You've already begun." And that was the real ending. No award, no final speech, just the spark passed on to a child who would pass it on again, like a whisper in the wind, soft but unstoppable. Sundar sat alone in his office in California, the screen still showing the message from Abdi, the young boy from Somalia. His team had left for the day, but Sundar stayed behind, staring at those few simple lines. "That I want to become a doctor. Can your team help me?" His heart felt heavy, not because of the pressure from governments or the media, but because he knew what was at stake. It was not about fame or politics. It was about one child, and then another, and another. Thousands like Abdi, waiting, hoping. Sundar leaned back and closed his eyes. He remembered walking barefoot to school in Chennai. He remembered sitting on the floor, sharing books with 3 other students. He remembered his mother giving him extra rotis so he could share with the boy who had nothing. Those memories came rushing back like waves. He opened his eyes, picked up his phone, and called his global operations head. "Make a list," he said. "Start with the schools that reached out from Africa, then Southeast Asia, then Latin America. We will expand." The operations head hesitated. "Double quotes, sir. Do you want to wait? There is still pressure. Some governments may push back harder." But Sundar answered calmly, "The world can shout, but we must move quietly, like roots under the soil." The next morning, Sundar released a video. It was short, only 1 minute. In the video, he said, "I once received help when I had nothing. Now, I choose to give help where it is needed most. Not because it is easy, but because it is right. Education should not stop at borders. Hope should not need a passport." That video was shared by millions. Young people across the world posted videos, saying, "We stand with Sundar." But behind the scenes, powerful people grew more nervous. In a private meeting in Geneva, officials from 3 countries gathered to discuss Sundar's expansion. One leader said, "We can't allow one man to have this much influence. It's dangerous." Another replied, "But he's not doing harm. He's giving children tools to learn." The first leader frowned. "Yes. But what if they start listening to him more than to us?" Back in India, Sundar arrived at another rural school. He sat with children, helped them open their new learning tablets, and listened to their dreams. One child said, "I want to become a scientist like Kalpana Sala." Another said, "I want to teach in the village so no girl has to drop out." Again Sundar smiled and said, "Then I will give you the tools. The rest is yours to build." While leaving the school, an old teacher walked up to him and said, "Sir, we know they are trying to stop you, but just remember, no river flows backward. Once you've begun, you must keep going." Sundar nodded, but that night, things took a dark turn. His team informed him that a well-funded group had filed legal complaints in 3 countries, accusing his foundation of overstepping global education boundaries. They claimed he was influencing young minds without permission from local authorities. Media headlines began to shift again. They said, "Sundar, under legal pressure, world's silent tech hero, now faces global silence orders. Should one man lead the world's education?" And then came the final blow. A letter from the Global Education Board. It said, "You are requested to pause further expansion until all compliance reviews are complete." Failure to do so may lead to restrictions on your digital platforms in over 20 countries. His team was stunned. They asked, "Sir, what now?" Sundar replied softly, "We stop." They looked at each other in shock. He continued, "We stop the expansion, but we don't stop the mission. We pause our tools, but we don't pause our hearts." His head of outreach asked, "What does that mean?" Sundar stood up and walked to the window. Then he said, "We will send books, handwritten notes, learning kits, and letters from children in India who want to help children in other countries. We won't break any law, but we won't break our promise either." And so it began. Instead of digital tools, they sent real books. Instead of online lessons, they trained local teachers through quiet partnerships. Instead of loud announcements, they wrote handwritten notes from one student to another across oceans. The media did not know how to respond. Some headlines changed again. Sundar responds with ink, not code. Silent mission continues, one book at a time. Meanwhile, the legal reviews continued. But then, something unexpected happened. A group of world-famous scientists, writers, and educators signed a public letter titled, "Let Sundar Teach." In the letter, they said, "In a world full of noise, Sundar Pichai has shown us what silent leadership looks like. He has not broken any law. He has broken barriers of class, region, and fear. We urge global leaders to support, not stop, this mission." Within days, the letter was signed by over 1 million people. Even celebrities joined. One famous actor tweeted, "Silence never looked this powerful." But while the world debated and watched, Sundar made a quiet trip to Somalia. His team had traced the boy who wrote the message in a dusty village. Under a tree, Sundar met a beady eye. The boy wore a torn shirt, but his eyes were full of light. He ran to Sundar and hugged him tightly. Double quotes, "Sir, you came," he whispered. Sundar bent down and said, "I said I would help, and I meant it." He handed Abdi a small wooden box. Inside were books, pencils, and a letter written by a girl from India. The letter said, "Dear Abdi, I study in a village school. I also want to be a doctor. I believe we will meet one day. You can do this. Your friend." Mir Abdi held the letter close to his heart. He looked up and said, "I will study hard. I will help others, like you helped me." Tears filled Sundar's eyes. He whispered, "That's all I ever wanted." But even in that quiet joy, another message arrived. One of the countries, reviewing his platform, had decided to reject his application. They called him a soft threat. They said his silence masked global influence. Sundar read the message without emotion. He turned to his team and said, "They can close a door, but they cannot close a child's mind." He then gave a new order. "Let's translate our content into as many languages as possible. Let's print storybooks. Let's train volunteers. If the roads are blocked, we take the footpaths." The team smiled, inspired but deep inside. Sundar knew the challenges would grow. More pressure, more criticism, more silence required yet. He did not stop, and then one morning, he received a video message. It was from a classroom in Peru. A young girl stood up in front of the class and said, "Dear Sundar Pichai, they tried to stop you, but you helped my school anyway. Thank you. We believe in your silence. We hear it clearly." The class clapped, and in the background, a banner read, "Silent strength changes the world." And that message reached India. When Narendra Modi saw it, he called Sundar personally. He said, "You once stood beside me in silence when someone insulted me. Today, I stand beside you in silence. No cameras, no tweets, just trust." Sundar replied, "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." And then, something surprising happened. Vina Raj appeared again. He had started a foundation to help young speakers understand the power of calmness. He named it Voice Within. he said in an interview. I learned from Sundar that not every answer needs sound. Sometimes, it just needs truth. But soon, Sundar's journey would take a turn no one expected. A personal challenge was coming, not from the outside world, but from within his own family. A secret that had been hidden for years. A truth that could shake everything he believed in. And, in part 5, Sundar will face a moment that no silence can prepare him for. A moment where he must decide between protecting his past or standing for a painful truth.